Welcome to the AWS Compute section. So in this section, we'll cover services such as Amazon EC2, Amazon Elastic Container Service, ECS, and AWS Lambda. So there's quite a few services to cover. Now, which area are they covered under in the exam guide? Well, mostly domain-free technology. So it's about identifying some of those core AWS services. Now, the thing is, you also, for each service that is covered under the exam guide, you need to understand the various billing and pricing models associated with that service. And you also need to identify the security aspects that are related to that service. So there's a bit more than just understanding it at a technical level. You've got to understand a bit about security and billing as well. So let's move over to the questions. So let's just start this practice exam. And the first question asks, which AWS service is suitable for an event-driven workload? So in other words, some kind of event has happened somewhere to some service. And what service can you use that will then be triggered by that event? So when something happens, it automatically starts that service. Now, is that Amazon EC2? Not really, no. So that's not what natively works with Amazon EC2. What about Beanstalk? So Elastic Beanstalk is a service you can use to upload code and it automatically deploys the resources you need, which is really good, but it's not really event driven. Now, what about AWS Lambda? That looks like the best option to me because absolutely Lambda is an event driven service. So you can have something happen. For example, somebody might upload an object, a file, for instance, to an Amazon S3 bucket. And Lambda can then be notified of that, and it will then run some code and process that information, that data. So Lambda is an event-driven service. Lastly, we have Amazon Lumberyard. Now we want to make sure that we're confident that the incorrect answers are indeed incorrect. So what is Lumberyard? Well, it's actually a gaming engine. So it's not something, which you're likely to see as a correct answer on the Cloud Practitioner exam. It's not really a service that's in scope for the Cloud Practitioner. Like, you don't need to learn anything much about it. But it does pop up, and there's quite a few services that do pop up as incorrect answers, which is why I always recommend to my students to just go through the services on AWS at a really high level just to understand what they are. Even a paragraph description can help you just understand, and then you'll be confident. You'll say, well, I know it's not Lumberyard. So I've chosen Lambda. I'm pretty sure that's the correct answer. Let's continue. So yes, that is the correct answer, and Lambda is indeed an event-driven service. So let's have a look at an example of a architecture with AWS Lambda, and this is an event-driven architecture. So in this case, Lambda's in the middle here, and it's a function service, so it runs code, and it runs code in response to events. Some kind of trigger says, I need you to run the code and process this information. So a user might upload an image to a bucket. Amazon S3 will then notify Lambda, and Lambda then runs the code. And the code might take the image from the bucket, do something with it like resize the image and save it in another bucket. And it can also maybe write an event to CloudWatch logs so you have a record of what happened. So moving on to question 2, which AWS service can be used to run Docker containers? So for the exam, you should know what a Docker container is. It's basically a way of packaging up your code and various dependencies into a very lightweight method of executing and running that code. So in this case, we need to find out which service on AWS can run a Docker container. So is it Lambda? Can Lambda run a Docker container? Well, no, it can't. Lambda is a function service. You just upload code to Lambda, not containers. What about the Amazon Elastic Container Registry? Well, that sounds promising, but actually the ECR is where you store your Docker images. It's not where you run the containers themselves. So what about AWS Fargate? Well, yes, Fargate is part of the Amazon Elastic Container Service, and it's the version of ECS, which means that you don't have to launch EC2 instances to run your containers on. Instead, it's more of a serverless service, so you don't have to worry about that. But yes, it does run Docker containers, so that looks like a good answer. So let's just verify the last one here. Amazon AMI, well, that's an Amazon machine image, and those are associated with Amazon EC2, not with Docker containers or AWS Fargate. So we'll check that answer. And Fargate is the correct answer. There's a bit of a graphic there to show you about ECS and Fargate, but I'm going to take you over to a slide to give you a bit more background. So ECS is a highly scalable, high-performance container management platform which supports Docker containers. And a container is kind of like a virtual instance, but there's a lot less to manage with containers, so they're small and lightweight. And that means that the code and the runtime and the system tools and libraries all get packaged up in one container file. And they run very quickly and can be moved between different computing environments. So those are some of the benefits of ECS. Now, you also need to understand at a basic level that there are two different types of Elastic Container Service. So we have what are called launch types. We've got EC2 and Fargate. And with EC2, it basically means that you have to launch EC2 instances, and then the containers, the Docker containers, are run on top of the EC2 instance. Whereas with Fargate, you don't. So it actually does all that for you. You don't have to provision or manage EC2 instances. It automatically scales for you. So those are probably the key facts you need to know for the exam.